Hey everyone, my name is Dave Ford. Welcome to the Environmental Intelligence Podcast and LinkedIn Live. I'm the founder of the Ocean Plastic Leadership Network, founder of SALT, Sustainable Action Leadership Training, and here with my very good friend, Mr. Ian Rosenberger. He's the CEO of First Mile, the CEO of a company called Day Owl, the founder of a company called Work. And I would say Ian is dialed into the plastic waste issue in the global south or the developing world in a really unique way that you're not going to find so easily these days. And Ian's perspective is really interesting, and it's through a lot of experience. And welcome, Ian. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I don't know if I'm dialed into anything, but I'll do my best. It's always good to see you, and I'm really glad to be here.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Ian and I were just on stage together a couple of weeks ago in Vegas, of all places, which was my, was it your first trip back? It was my first trip out of the pandemic was to Vegas.
Yeah. It was my very first time to Vegas. I've never been to Vegas before. I didn't even get to gamble.
I didn't either. And actually, I came out refreshed, which was amazing. And I will say that it's ironic that we were at a sustainability conference in Vegas because it's probably the most unsustainable place I've ever been on so many fronts.
I felt that way to me too. I just can't get over how there's so much sun in that state and they can't figure out how to get solar panels on every available service. But it's another podcast.
That is totally another podcast. Well, so let's dig in. So we're talking about environmental intelligence, and we really have a thesis at the OPLN and at SALT that environmental intelligence is really like three parts. So that's experiencing the issue or crisis firsthand. It's learning from the oppositional position, so organizations that don't agree with yours, to like really deepen the understanding holistically. And third, just like what are the facts? And I think it's, knowing a bit of your story and also knowing where it is and how much this place is in the news, it'd be really great to get, an account of the experience that brought you into the secondary plastic markets in the global south, in the developing world. And I think we can start from there. So do you mind sharing a little bit of that story?
Sure. If the question is, how does a middle-class white guy from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania end up working as a trash collector in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, then it's definitely one I'm very happy to answer. I came by this completely by accident. I was unhappy with my work and my job and what I was doing with my life way back in 2010. The earthquake in Haiti happened around that time. I had some training in video production and photography, and I had spent a lot of time in South Central Africa with a friend of mine who started a nonprofit that was doing education around AIDS and HIV. I realized that I wanted to do something in that field. I wasn't really sure what though, and I know that whenever I was in communities in the global South and working with people there, that something really clicked for me, and I saw some of the best entrepreneurs I'd ever met in those communities, saw some of the best leaders I'd ever met in those communities, and I wanted to do as much as I could to learn from the really incredible work that was happening there. I still think that they're one of the most underestimated groups on the planet, and they happen to be fairly low income and the majority Black and brown communities, and so when the earthquake happened, I saw an opportunity to spend some time in Port-au-Prince. I went and did that, and my perspective on the nonprofit system and how we deliver developmental aid was just complete. I was just completely blown away by the way the system exists right now, and in spending 2 years working in almost relief circumstances around medical issues with people after the earthquake, stuff that, had they been born in the United States or with access to regular healthcare, would have been largely preventable. I got to know and become really good friends with, and in some cases family with, a lot of people on the ground in some of the more desperate scenarios that exist, certainly in our hemisphere, and if not the whole world. And what I learned from those people and who are still friends and family is that, we all want the same things. We all want a roof over our heads. We all want the ability to get up and go to work and have purpose in the morning. We all want to get a paycheck. And we all want our kids to have a better life than we had. And when I learned those things and heard that from those communities and from people that I respected so much, it made me realize that as a person of relative privilege, that my job was to be a connector between communities that don't have that voice and communities that do, and to encourage the communities that do to drive resources into the communities that don't, so that we can increase the volume and amplification of those messages and all good work that's being done there. Along the way, it just so happened that the backdrop to all of those conversations and all that time was trash, because, as you know, Dave, in a low-income world, waste infrastructure doesn't always exist in the way that we want it to, and that plastics specifically, but all waste materials are not only a massive issue, but what I've come to learn is one of the defining issues of our time. And I wanted to figure out some way to connect those two things.
Well, I think it's interesting, given it's July 21st today, and there was a major event, a really tragic event that happened in Haiti last week with the assassination of their prime minister. So I want to bookmark that, and I want to go back to 2010. And I think this is an interesting opportunity, to when you got to Haiti initially, how bad was it after the earthquake? Was it like a few months? Was it a few days? And what was the scene on the ground for the people there? And then maybe after that, you can talk about what the waste management system was in 2010.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, with the death of the president these past couple of weeks, the Haitian people are, sad to say, just another kick in the face in a long string of kicks in the face in terms of that community and that country, and we can certainly talk about that. After the earthquake, I would say that was another kick in the face into that community. And it's still incredible. These numbers are still absolutely mind-blowing and extremely hard to wrap your mind around. And when you say that 250 or 300,000 people died from the earthquake and 1.5 million were left homeless, that scale of a disaster is hard to fathom. And it's incredible, certainly it was in the news, but not to the, if that had happened in the United States, it would still be in the news every day. These are the types of disasters that cripple countries for generations. So, we have this expectation, or maybe this expectation, I guess, where, when these things happen, we tend to say, oh, what a shame, and then move on. And when we dive into it, you start to see inequity that exists in really, really critical ways. And I think the time after the earthquake that I spent there is no exception to that. It was, for all intents and purposes, a war zone after the earthquake. For anybody that's watching or will watch that has spent any time in Haiti, it's difficult to put into words how much suffering that existed in one place during that time and has continued since that time. Despite that, this is incredible. This just speaks to the resilience of the community there. Even in those moments, there were so many moments of hope and of pragmatism, of the realization that there was time to get back to work. So I could talk for days and days about what it was like, but basic access to things like food and water and shelter. Maslow's hierarchy was just non-existent. Not to mention the psychological scars that coming from losing, where in a country where there's at that time 10 million people, where if you lose 250,000, you've lost a significant percentage of your population. So everybody knew somebody who had died or was missing or was homeless. Everybody, 15% of the population was homeless. So, imagine what that looks like in the United States when your homeless rate is above your unemployment rate.
So you were there in the beginning. It was as you described. I mean, it was the pinnacle of one of the biggest crisis to hit this side of the earth in a really long time.
Yeah, thousands of years. Yeah.
And then you stayed there through as it started to get more stable, and you started to dig in for different opportunities to help, I would imagine, a lot of these homeless folks and other people get meaningful get meaningful work. Is that really how the impetus began to start the what the time was Thread, correct? Thread International.
Yeah, I wish I had that much foresight. It wasn't at that time. At that time, it was just like there were people that were asking for help in acute situations. Like, you know, a guy who's now, my brother. That, you know, Tati and I refer to each other as brothers. He, I met a kid who had a tumor that he was dying of that had been diagnosed in the U.S. It had been fixed when he was, a kid, and it had grown and grown and grown to the point where it was going to kill him. Another young girl who had cancer, and another who was born without the ability to urinate and was reprocessing all their own urine. Like all these kind of stories that were completely preventable, but mostly medical, were coming out during the earthquake. And me and some friends got together and raised some money. I was a dum-dum when it came to development and even, things like social justice and equity. And, my training in school, was around race and ethnic relations, but, and sociology to a large extent. But, certainly, the lived experience that I was seeing every day was outrageous. I mean, there was just like no other term for it. So I was just triaging what I could do to drive as many resources into those communities as possible. And so we had more and more people, all of a sudden we had, 20, 30 people, and we were raising more and more money. And it was like, well, what are we trying to do here? And I kind of fell on the development principles of 3 people. I started reading and researching, and then spent 2 years asking people in these communities what it is they thought that they needed. Like, what do you need? Like, if I was to come down and help it here, like, how am I useful to you? Like, what do you need in order to kind of self-actualize, find some agency, do the things you want to do with your life, etc. And what I heard over and over again from people on the ground was that, like, they were sick and tired of being like handed development dollars and handed immunizations and handed this and handed that and handed, like, they don't like it any more than anybody else. And, what I heard over and over again is like, I would really love a job. Like, I'd really love to go to work. Not like I want to start the next great company. Sometimes you heard that, but no more than you hear it in the United States. It was most people just want, like, I want to clock in and clock out, collect my paycheck and go, like, have fun with my kids. I would rather not have to, like, comb through a landfill all day, like all the things that we would expect. So, that was the impetus to set up programming that would help do that for them. And I didn't really know how to do it. So, in countries where there's 60% or so unemployment, like there is in Haiti, and right now even more, there aren't a lot of jobs to go around. So I always say, like, I just get real pissed off because I feel like so many people who are in the development field, they went to Harvard Kennedy School and not Harvard Business School. And we need more business schools. We need more, philanthropy is great, but we need more, structures that actually drive dollars into these communities and create jobs. So there weren't any. So I was just like, well, I guess we're going to try to create some. And that's where the idea for the business was born. And that's how we got connected to waste.
Amazing. And just the initial business versus what it is today, how did it start? Like, and what was the how'd you go to market?
Yeah, so the original business was, we saw all the trash on the ground. I came home, I Googled what we could turn trash into. I came across fabric, learned that it was textile materials were being made out of post-consumer recycled bottles. I didn't know anything about anything. So it was like, okay, can we make some fabric? And so we tried to make some fabric. It was real crappy, but we used that little swatch of fabric that to go to brands and say, listen, if we gave you this fabric, or we sold you this fabric, and we told you the story of all the people who were involved in making it and collecting this material. And, I was literally transporting 50-pound bags of plastic flake across the border in my suitcase so that I could take it and test it at a facility in North Carolina where we can make this stuff. And I was trying to convince these brands that, like, the origin story of this material was important. And if you
Oh, it looks like we lost you for a second, Ian.
Yeah, am I back?
You're back. Good. All good.
Yeah. So we were just trying to convince these brands to do it, and eventually a brand said yes. Timberland said yes. If you can, I'll give you 12 weeks to make a swatch of material, and we started doing that. and we learned that fabric wasn't always the best use of recycled materials. We learned a lot about human rights. We learned about building human rights frameworks and what it takes to get to a living income. And all of this kind of like 8 years of knowledge became us now. We now connect the biggest brands in the world with these communities, and we remove all of the barriers and all of the risk necessary to those brands engaging these communities, pulling material out of it, using it in their recycled.
We lost you again, Ian. I'll give a little. I'm sure you're gonna come back in a second. We just lost you for, no worries. We lost you for 2 seconds. Let me zoom out real quick and just like kind of paint the global stage and fill in my gaps here. But essentially, there are, we think, 10 to 15 million informal economy workers all over the world in developing nations that are essentially putting food on the table by picking up plastic, glass, aluminum, whatever sort of waste has value. And they're getting these out of the environment, off the streets, out of landfills and illegal dumping sites. And there's right now 2 billion people in the world that don't have any access to any waste management at all. So there's no place to take their waste. And the amount of plastic and amount of other materials that they're getting, but I think plastics like media, on the rise significantly in the last 10 years, in the global South, there's just nothing to do with this stuff. So it ends up getting illegally dumped. It ends up getting burned in people's backyards, which obviously has like terrible climate implications. So we're starting to see operations all over the world that are, informal and becoming more formalized, which is the work that Ian's doing, so that these recycled materials can end up in products. And it's a powerful story, and it's empowering local entrepreneurs at its highest expression, is empowering local entrepreneurs on the ground, and just like you said, putting people to work.
Yeah. I mean, we think there's more than 10 to 15 million, but we don't have the numbers yet. So we're that's the latest numbers. I think Systemic is the ones that have been doing some of the research on that, and I think it's a good baseline. But we think there's a lot more given the amount of people who make a partial living doing this. So it would make it one of the larger industries on the planet in terms of employment. And it's really important to note that like these people don't have, for the most part, access to any of the same stuff that we have access to, whether that's healthcare or like vertical movement through their careers, the agency to get out of a cash business. Some of them are locked in indentured service because it is a cash business. There's a lot of child labor. So like the problem with those areas is like they're bad bets for-profit corporations, right? So like generally the biggest brands in the world don't want to engage in these spaces because it's scary, because if they get on the hook for things like child labor, it makes them look bad. So what the principal business issue that we've come across is that brands have set these incredibly ostentatious sustainability goals, which I think is a good thing. I think it's great that they threw the rock out down the road and they're trying to catch up to it. But if they were to source all the recycled plastic that they say they're going to source from the places they source it now, which is the United States, Japan, Taiwan, Western Europe, there's not nearly enough plastic to get them what they need. So we have to help them develop these businesses in these areas and push resources into these spaces and to develop technology that actually empowers people in these communities.
Yeah, and I mean it's so all these big companies, the sort of 800-pound gorillas, Fortune 200 companies that put products on shelves, have really aggressive recycled material goals where they're trying to get, significant. I mean, and it's different company to company. There's a lot of organizations that are pushing this, but I mean, I'd say uniformly, like they want this material. They just can't quite figure out how to get it and how to get it in a way that is, socially moral, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? I mean, you said there's child labor, but like, can you tell some of the story? I mean, I think like when we talk about child labor and like the realities on the ground in some of these places, like you give a really sober assessment of what that actually means. Can you lay that out a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like like our job, like you said, it's hard for them to find that material. Our job is to help them find it, and like we're really good at that job. So like I think our biggest client right now is a brand like Unilever, right? Where they are really actively looking for this material and trying to do the right thing. And so we help them do the right thing. In terms of child labor, yeah, look, like whether you like it or not, if you use something that's recycled plastic somewhere in your house right now, chances are a kid touched it at one point or another. Child labor is not a boogeyman problem. We're on a quest to eliminate the scariness of that issue. It's a bad problem, but it shouldn't be scary. And the reason it shouldn't be scary is because the choices to put kids to work in a family is almost entirely economic. Parents are trying to put food on the table, and when you only have so many dollars to devote to rice every day, and you have this many mouths to feed, you have to make choices between, who goes to school and who gets to eat, who has to collect plastic bottles to put food on the table. It doesn't require a lot of education to pick up a bottle. So it's an easy, quote unquote, easy thing to do for somebody that doesn't have that, doesn't have a skill set. The problem with it, well, there's a ton of problems with it, but the biggest problem with it takes away agency. So there are plenty of people who say, oh, like, as a family after school today, we're going to go and collect some plastic bottles for additional income. That's one way that this happens. And that's very different than we have to take you out of third grade today, and we have to ask you to spend your morning collecting plastic bottles. You can see how when you dive into this issue, you start talking about things like this with a brand, and like, this is really scary. You're literally asking them to dive headfirst into this issue because like they want to use recycled material, but you're saying like, look, this material has all this stuff attached to it. The thing is, Dave, like these systems, these human-powered systems of how we create things from recycled materials are, if you're able to solve the problems like child labor, indentured service, predatory lending, etc., are the most efficient system we have for collecting this material and putting it back into the use system. So like if we were to shut the tap off of plastic right now, we were to ask people, we were to say like, how's it going to get cleaned up? Like these human-powered supply chains would be the ones responsible. And in large part, in certain countries, human-powered supply chains, even in the absence of waste infrastructure, are collecting and recycling upwards of 90% of the material that's out there that's able to be recycled. So you're seeing actually efficiencies that groups like Waste Management or Republic or et cetera, that they would never be able to dream of that much ability to reuse. But like these systems are somehow more efficient. So like we believe very strongly that if you can empower these groups to solve for the problems that are holding them back, then like we have this opportunity to leapfrog kind of burn and bury waste management technology in the same way that like countries in Africa leapfrog telecommunications and went straight to cell phones. There's a huge opportunity for innovation here.
It's, we're in lots of conversations with a lot of these big waste management companies and what we're doing with the, Ocean Plastic Leadership Network. And interestingly, I was on a conversation with one of the big global giants the other day, talking about just the business model of setting up infrastructure in places like Africa to process this stuff that comes in, and how it's just not there. It's not right as it is today. The sort of when you talk about the, $1 billion companies in and building huge, really expensive facilities to process all this recycled waste, it's just the math doesn't work yet. But like we talked to like our friends in Mr. Green Africa and Kieran, who is a part of the Ocean Plastic Leadership Network. He has an amazing organization Ian and I know him well in Nairobi. And I know you have a bunch of operations set up in South Africa and otherwise. You're starting to see these smaller entrepreneurial organizations making it happen, right, and starting to make these viable. Can you talk a little bit about that? And can you also talk, and maybe part two of that question is your experience with corporations and like getting them engaged in this issue. Like, can you talk about what it's been like taking some of these corporate leaders to visit Haiti and other places that you guys operate? Because that's certainly central to our whole thesis.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, these studies being done around like how do we drop in, this like the way we recognize as being the best way to do things into these communities, I think is completely backwards. I think that the fact is there are groups that are already there collecting this material and doing a really, really good job of it. And I think that for us to go in and say that we have a better way to do it, and here's how much it costs, and we're going to bring in kind of our shiny new gadgets and technology into a space, I think frankly smacks of the same type of colonialism that we're kind of used to in these spaces. So like for anybody that says like we're going to go down and drop what we think is the way to do this on these particular folks, I think you would do well to spend some more time on the ground there, and we're certainly happy to take whoever wants to go or chat with whoever wants to and talk about it. But I think when we take brands and we get on the ground with them and we talk with them and we show them and we introduce them to the people that we serve, undoubtedly what they walk away with is a new and different understanding of how business operates in these places. They walk away, they might walk in feeling like a place is there like and should be kind of given dollars and donated to, and they walk away, we hope in most cases, understanding that like there's some really powerful business people in these spaces.
Any stories pop to mind with any specific brands that you can mention or not mention? And I don't want to, I know a lot of the brands you work with, but I don't want to say without you saying, but like any specific stories of like direct experience that pop to mind?
Yeah, sure. And I'll say some of the brands, I won't say any of the brands that that walked away with and I thought were really dum-dums about the whole thing, but I will highlight one that I think is really, really great. And that's with our partner at HP. Ellen Jakowski was not the chief sustainability officer there yet, but she, to her immense credit, let me spend some time with her, outside, like literally outside the original offices of Hewlett and Packard, pitching her on the importance of using recycled materials in their printer cartridges and how we might be able to do that with materials in Haiti. And like I said, to her immense credit, she came. She showed up. She spent time with me there. She spent time on the ground. She listened. She learned, and like she then took that message back to the rest of her team, and she spread that news. And that type of leadership is exactly the type of leadership that we wish happened every single day. Because when brands do this, undoubtedly, like over and over and over again, they walk in being like, oh my gosh, we have to be if we start talking about our sustainability goals, and it's going to uncover things that we're not doing well someplace else. Like every time we hear that, like if we open up this little piece of our supply chain, then it's going to open up a Pandora's box, and everybody's going to know about all the bad, stuff that we do. But when they walk away from these feeling like we have to talk about this. Like we have to get involved here. So, that the stories of like the HPs and the Unilevers and another one of our clients is Puma, and they're doing a big piece of their line now. It's coming from First Mile Materials, and over and over and over again, when they join us in these spaces, they learn something, and they walk away with a more optimistic view of what can happen.
I should say that Ian and I met each other on our Ocean Plastic Leadership Summit 2 years ago in the middle of the Atlantic Gyre, 500 miles off the coast of Bermuda, with Ellen Jakowski from HP, who actually introduced us, and that's the reason you were on that ship, which is amazing. That's right. And I feel like and I mean that's probably we had 165 leaders across the spectrum snorkeling 2 miles below us, pulling handfuls of plastic waste out of the middle of the ocean. One of the big consumer packaged goods companies, I'm not going to say which one, found one of their toothbrushes floating around out there and was able to take that back and show their senior leadership team what they found in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, and that's just like one. I mean, we've taken groups in Antarctica. We have plans to take brands specifically into the global South, to immerse in these sort of operations because of feedback that we've gotten from you and Kieran and other partners we have, all over the world that are part of the network. And it's something happens, and it's, and there's a lot of research on like the power of experience and what happens when things crystallize and how you just take these experiences with you forever. I mean, you can read a whole book, and I can't tell you how many books I've completely forgotten that I can't even, and I know it's not me alone, that you can't even recall a single fact out of a book, but you remember in depth what happens when you're on the other. I remember when I did my first waste tour in Delhi, and I came across the Gazapur landfill, which at the time was half on fire and half full of waste collectors pulling waste out of this giant mountain on the outskirts of town in Delhi. Not even in the outskirts, kind of like right in the middle of town. It's just a giant mountain of waste that was half on fire with thousands of hawks circling around, with like cows coming out in the middle of the road right next to it. Like you never forget that stuff. And
no, you don't. And I think the thing that it's important that we remember every day is that, that we're there for a very small sliver of time. We go for a visit and we come back and it sticks with us forever. But that is the reality of the day to day. Right now it's happening in landfills all over the world. Today, people are weighing and getting paid for their materials. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like, I think the principal issue I think that we're going to be coming up against here in the coming years is the paradox of our organization is that we are still calling for the ban on single-use plastics entirely. We see the importance of that as part of our move to a zero-waste future. I think there's lots of brands out there who are saying, well, we need to be able to figure out how to use these materials again and again and again. And we understand that there are business models out there that are going to take time to change. We get that. But, and ours is certainly one of them, because it's an existential crisis to our business model if plastic stops, existing. It's also an existential crisis to the tens of millions of people who make a living this way. So what do we do in that situation? How do we call for a ban on single-use plastics, but then ensure that, the people that are making a living that way remain employed? And the simple fact is that there are like lots of things that we need humans in jobs for, but we don't actually extend the opportunities in the ways that we need to Black and brown communities globally. So there are plenty of jobs to go around in those communities. So to see us get rid of single-use plastic entirely, to move towards a future where that is possible and where reuse is possible, A, I don't think we're that far off from, and B, I know several thousand people who make their living collecting in waste who would very much like to get trained on how to use a computer. And I think, or on how to, work in a manufacturing job. So that's a future we're not afraid of. But I think the thing that we think about all the time is, like, there's this massive freaking problem in front of us. I think you said it last time we spoke in terms of the amount of material that's actually just sitting out there right now, the amount of plastic that's been actually produced. I think am I right to think it's in the trillions of pounds or around the trillion pounds?
I think it's one of those ever moving
yeah,
fact
right.
that we're not exactly sure, but it's a lot.
Yeah,
It's
a massive. The issue is, like, it's going to take some time to move through, and in that time, I feel like the people who are the front line, and the last line of defense, are people that already right now, have a job of collecting waste. I don't think we think about that or talk about that enough.
And I think this is like a perfect time to sort of bring up the Global Plastics Treaty that Ian and I are both working on. The Ocean Plastic Leadership Network is running the Global Plastics Treaty dialogues together with Greenpeace and World Wildlife Fund, the team at First Mile, A Plastic Planet, Systemic, and 110 members of the Ocean Plastic Leadership Network that span the petrochemical sector all the way to some really powerful activist organizations that are dedicated to turning off plastic at the tap. And this is real. This is happening right now. And this is where this sort of like positional intelligence and understanding is so important, because it is a complicated, chaotic mess. And what is fact and what is not fact and what is opinion, and you see so much contradictory research that is coming from industry in some cases and activists in some cases. And, I was on a call where last week where I was told that one of the big concerns from some of the petrochemical sector is that if plastic gets banned, then the folks in the global south and the places where you work are going to be disproportionately affected, and that it's going to be And this was, I raised my eyebrows, and we just don't know. And there's so much that we need to know. And I think really like dialing into where these fault lines of misunderstanding are is crucial. So, I mean, can you say anything about that? Just like curious your opinion there.
Yeah, I mean, we did this with smoking too, right? Like, we had the same issue, the same conversations about what would happen to the tobacco markets and farms in the United States South if we banned tobacco, or we heavily taxed tobacco. Like, we have these ways of talking about these things to preserve our own business models that are, I think will leverage people. I think, maybe in good ways and many times in bad ways. Everybody comes up with their own research, but there is a set of facts out there. Like there is opinions certainly where people can look at research and come away with different perspectives, but like there are some immutable facts. We're producing stuff that's killing the ocean and harming people and the planet. We have to figure that out. And it wasn't that long ago that we lived in a world where that didn't exist. And I don't think it's outside of the capacity of the human spirit of innovation to innovate our way out of this problem. But I think that many times we overlook the people who are already solving it. I think when I hear that there are, I'll just say it outright, and this will probably not be good for business, but when I hear that there are companies who are using waste collectors as an excuse to continue to pull oil out of the ground and turn it into things like plastic, it frankly makes me sick to my stomach. Because if that indeed were the case, then you'd see those companies investing heavily in those communities, and they're just not. And they'll say, yes, we're investing in here and here and here and here. It's not enough. It's not even near enough. So so I don't want to pick on that comment specifically, but like, the activist part of our work is to call, to speak truth to power, and in that situation, it's just not enough. Like, there are literally 30, 40, we think in excess of 50 million people that are living and working this way. And if we cared about that, then we would be spending real time in those communities developing what they're going to do next. The simple fact is the vast majority of them are making between $2 and $3 a day picking up trash. So it's not like these industries that are making plastic are actually creating any real quality of life for people in those communities. So I hope I didn't overstep my bounds there, but that one makes me angry.
There is no overstepping of bounds, and that's the idea. When we have industry folks that want to come on and talk about issues that are challenging, that are comfortable doing that, we want to make this is how we learn from each other, right? And it's and there's misinformation, and there's also opportunities to sort of get on the same page, and some of it just might be miscommunication, and some of it might be games of telephone that are played, and I think that's mission critical. I'm on the phone, I'm on Zoom all day, every day, talking about where we're at with the global treaty. And even since we spoke last 2 weeks ago, so much has been changed. You have 100 countries right now that are way in favor of a global agreement. We've been using the words Paris Agreement for plastic, or kind of early on, and a lot of groups don't want to talk about the Paris Agreement because there's so many challenges and issues with the Paris Agreement. But let's just call it a meaningful global instrument or global agreement to solve this issue. That's really what everybody wants, right? So it's got to have enough teeth to actually do its job. So a treaty would harmonize standards and definitions. That's really important, right? The fact that we could start speaking a language uniformly with 193 countries recognized by the UN in the world, that right now there's 147 different sets of regulations for companies to try to navigate, which is really hard to do business, but it makes it a lot harder to meet their goals. So that's really important. And I think we're starting to see a lot of industry dial into that, in different sectors of industry want different levels. But then you have the Norwegian government and the European Union that really wants something that addresses the full life cycle of plastics, right? It's not just about marine debris or what's floating in the ocean or in rivers, but it just starts at the top. And the environmental movement sort of championing that. We need to make sure that, the position, I should say, of these countries and the environmental movement is that we need to make sure that as soon as plastic is made, or even before it's made, that there are regulations in place, right? And obviously that could really be a hard pill to swallow for a lot of industries that, sectors of industry that depend on plastic and that have lots of people employed in plastic. And there's this just transition that is so central to this, and it affects people all over the world, here and abroad. And it's just so complicated, right? And there's this fault lines of like, should we do reduction, right? Should we, just like the Montreal Protocol, where they reduce the harmful refrigerants that were depleting the ozone layer, should we reduce the amount of virgin or new plastic that's coming out in the world? And then you have how much should be invested into this waste management infrastructure in places where there's no waste management. There's 2 billion people right now, projected to be 4 billion people, right? And who pays for it? Is it going to be big checks that are cut from countries in the global north or Western world that are going to developing country? That's what stymied Paris for years, right? Or what was going to be the climate agreement, and that's what killed Copenhagen, right? So, and then you get into human rights and social justice and what's happening in the global south, and like, how do we bring these countries and the groups that you represent to the table in an equitable way so that they can say what they need? Because it's like you said, it's like they're out there, the last line of defense. And I mean, that's
they're the single largest group of stakeholders, right, who have direct contact with this material every day.
So you get into, like, when you start to talk about facts, there's a different set of facts in some cases that some industries playing with around the climate effects of plastic and the way that climate and the oceans correlate. Because obviously, like, the climate change is, nobody's going to argue that climate change isn't as important as an issue. We feel it every day. I'm in New York. I don't know, you're in did you see the wildfire smoke come over yesterday from Oregon? Like, I've never experienced that in my life. I went out for a run. I had no idea. And I was like coughing at the end of it. And then I found out that, like, we were like hazardous air quality from fires in Oregon. Nobody's going to argue the climate's not the issue number one, but there's this correlation between ocean health and climate that's becoming more and more of the mainstream. That's going to be a big piece of what the UK government's pushing at COP26 this year. And I think in general, it's like, how can we make all of this less complicated? How can we, like, communicate the facts, not just to industry, not just to activist groups? Certainly it makes sense for them to understand where they sit and what they agree on and what they don't agree on. But also, like, how can we just make sure the world knows what's going on? How can we just up everyone's understanding? Because, like, it's the time, this is like our time, right? And
this is the decade. We're in it. These 10 years are going to dictate the way the rest of the way the world is for our children. And I think we said, I'm sure every generations before have said that. And I think that in certain settings it's true, but given the growth rate of technology, the growth rate of population, the growth rate of, the speed with which our culture operates and throws things out into the world, we are in it. Like, this is now rubber meets the road. What we do now matters. And I despite all of this, I'm super optimistic. I probably don't have as many reasons to be, but I think that I believe very, very strongly in the voices that are right now kind of crying out for change. And I think that I think even within industry, you're seeing some changes that maybe 5 or 10 years ago you never would have seen. The question right now is it's all matters of degrees, quite literally. Are we doing too little, too late? Like, seeing the changes that we're about to see in some of the larger fossil fuel companies like Exxon and the board changes that you're seeing there, activists that are now on that board that are not just like there to make a stink, but actually there to solve for the problem. Like, how do we take a business model that for so long was based on drilling things out of the bottom of the earth, the middle of the earth, and convert it into creating energy for people in means that are renewable? How do we slow down the amount of material that we're pulling out of the earth, the middle of the earth, turning into plastic, and how do we eventually eliminate that? I believe very, very strongly that this change is the single largest business opportunity in human history. I really, truly believe that, like, these things are going to change the way that humans interact with their economies, that the way that they buy and sell goods, the way they transport things. Like, that should be so exciting from an entrepreneur's perspective. Like, massive opportunity. The problem that happens in all of these, if you look back, anthropologically, sociologically, like at history, every time there's this kind of big sea change in technology, there are people that get left behind, and the people who are in place, who are kind of the incumbents, are always the ones that are trying to slow down that change. And it just so happens we're at that time when it comes to fossil fuels. And I think if I were the CEO of a fossil fuel company, I would be pouring millions and millions and millions of dollars into that innovation, so I could take advantage of that change as opposed to sitting on the sidelines and waiting for my business to go away, because that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you just referenced the Engine One activist takeover of Exxon, where they got 3 board seats because they got pension funds to vote with them to make sure that, could get Exxon on their way environmentally. That's huge. And these leverage and risk management and risk factors, they're coming hard and fast, right? There's this international ecocide movement where like environmental pollution actually will be elevated to international war crimes. This is something that's in its infancy today, that in the next 10 years is going to be significant. We also have the first rights of nature movements, where like a river can sue a company in 14 countries right now, or sue an actual country. Like think about the Amazon jungle suing the Brazilian government. We're not there yet, but this is coming, right? And it's coming because the world's on fire, right? And it's coming because of all these challenges. And when you start to talk about a plastics treaty, like what happens when, I've heard that pretty soon we're going to be able to get blood tests and find out how much plastic's in our bodies. And when you start to correlate that data to high cancer rates, or if that's real, we're going to find out like things are going to start moving.
Yeah. It's just about pressure. And I think you said it earlier, like, anybody out there who might fall on the other end of the spectrum, like inviting them to the table and say, well, let's have the conversation. Like, let's chat about it. Let's talk about it. Because like, I believe very strongly in business. I think it's real crappy for people who are activists and work in this space to say, well, we got to solve the problem, but I don't have any suggestions for how to solve it, right? Like, you got to stop doing what you're doing, XYZ chemical company, but like, I don't know what to tell you in order to like what you're going to do about all the jobs, because like, frankly, every single business out there, they have people who put food on the table for their kids and have kids to go to school, and like, like all the fossil fuel companies, they support economies, of people who are just trying to get by, just like the people we serve in Haiti. So like, it's impossible for me to say out of one side of my mouth, like, you got to stop doing it and not suggest what you could be doing. And I ultimately think like, we really feel strongly that like, if there are brands or there are companies out there who are like, man, like who listen to this or see this and are like, these guys, they're just talking out of one side of their mouth and just on one side of the issue. I want to, for all of you who are listening, come, let's have the conversation, because I believe really strongly, if you're one of those companies, you have a massive opportunity to find win-wins in these spaces, and to make a lot of money for your company.
Well, I mean, and that's what we're all about, actually, right? I mean, we are on this tightrope at the OPLN. We're on this tightrope between activists and industry. There's so many good people that work at these companies, and the global treaty dialogues, the global plastics treaty dialogues in itself is an opportunity. Like on the flip side, environmental groups, we've found at times, are really fighting battles from 5 to 10 years ago, and certain sectors, certain companies are moving significantly now. Nowhere fast, nowhere near as fast as environmental groups are mandating, but it's important to know what the fault line is and where the battles are. And if you've already won a battle, it's important to know that, so that you can put your resources in a different direction. And there's so many good people that work for all these corporations. So, I mean, I think we both experience that, right? So like, I don't think we're like, I think we both have to walk this line, in a good way. And it's really important to also shout out the good work that's being done alongside of the huge delta that we need to cover moving forward. We have 5 minutes left, and I want to just kind of come back to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what's happening in Haiti today, because and your people, how are your people down there? Like, we just obviously it's been really, really difficult time, and wanted to get an update.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Haiti was our first supply chain. Like I said, we're in. So we have a bunch of other supply chains now all over the world, Africa and in Asia and South Central America. We talked about the earthquake being a kick in the head, and when your country loses its leader, and the constitutional situation is as tenuous as it is, and inflation's rampant, and it's difficult to get basic supplies. These are all the recipes for kind of really bad stuff, that can happen. I think the important thing for everybody to remember is that, like, whether we like it or not, we are connected to what's happening in those places, and that what happens there affects us here. And it might not feel like it every day, but it does. But like a lot of our people who are waste collectors, aggregators, families of those people, they're having difficulty leaving their homes to get to school. They're having difficulty leaving their homes to get access to water and food. So a lot of the work that we're doing right now is just to make sure that they have what they need and that they have access to the resources they need to just make sure they're eating while they can't leave their home. Life, even in the past couple of days, has returned a little bit more to normal, quote unquote normal. There's this kind of uneasy calm that has been precipitated by this happening. The simple fact is I don't think anybody has any sense of what the road looks like here. There's no real viable path right now towards a new constitution or one that's enforceable. Again, we could talk about a whole podcast of why Haiti is the way that it is right now and what's going on, but they don't have a court to help adjudicate what's going on in the proper way. Their parliament is largely been disbanded and left. So they don't have a Congress that can actually figure out what's going on. They don't really have a president, although they have some competing prime ministers. The issue I would say is, and the thing that we're on the lookout for right now, is what does 5 years from now look like when inflation continues to go up, when another earthquake happens or another hurricane happens, which is wont to do. And certainly in the past 10 years, they've experienced 4 major hurricanes, at least 4, and 1 massive earthquake. So it certainly will happen. The question is, what do we do about it? And what I'm finding, what we're seeing, is that a lot of organizations are saying, well, we only have so many resources. We're going to kind of save our dry tinder until things get worse. And my point to everybody there is like, are you crazy? Like, when could it get worse? And if we don't invest those resources now into these communities, it's most certainly going to get worse. Like, if there was a time for development dollars, it is now, to be able to fill the hole that civil society can't fill. So we have a team of about 20 people on the ground in Haiti, and they're all safe. They're all doing okay. I think they're worried and scared, just like everybody else is, but even more so since it affects them every day.
Well, thank you. Thanks for that recap. And thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate it. I know that you got a job you're trying to fill. It's pretty cool. Can you talk about that real quick to leave us on that note?
Of course. Yeah. We are hiring a senior associate projects manager. So this is somebody who is in the work every day with us. They be working with the biggest brands on the planet, as well as with our field teams, as well as exploring and mapping and assessing supply chains in new countries and new communities. So it's a very exciting job. If you are, 5 or 10 years out of school and looking to get involved in a really fast-growing organization that has an activist bend and a business bend, you can find us at firstmilemade.com, or we're online at First Mile Impact as our handle. So check it out. I'll also give you my email address. My email address is ian@threadinternational.com, which is the name of our parent holding company. And that's it. Thanks so much for having me, man. It's good to see you.
No problem. We'll link to that we'll link to you guys and link to the job listing and everything. And dude, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Always appreciate your insight. So good to hang out with you so closely after our little Vegas experience a couple weeks ago at the Waste Expo. But rock and roll, man. Have a great day. And thank you for coming to Environmental Intelligence. This is our new podcast. Super great to have Ian Rosenberger, CEO and founder of First Mile and DAO and Thread International, and founder of Work. Dude, you got a lot of titles.
Yeah. A lot of work to do. My list of things to do is definitely outweighed by the amount of life I have left to do them.
Got it. Well, I better let you run then. Talk soon.
All right. Take care, man.
See you, buddy.
Bye-bye.